Let's go ahead and break down the 5 saltwater myths. These are broad general statements that we hear from everyday customers, people that really kind of want to get into the hobby, but they're not quite sure.
Yeah.
Myth number 1, saltwater in general, the hobby, too expensive. Matt, tell us why that's not true.
It's what you put into it. Just with anything, you can drive a car down the road and it can be a normal car, or you can have a $300,000 race car. I've seen Honda Civics for $1,500 on Craigslist and $30,000. Same thing with saltwater. So it's really what you want to put into it.
Yeah.
I find a lot of my easiest ways of making an affordable tank is, this is a secret, so you gotta keep this on the DL. What I used to do, because I was in high school, my easiest way to afford a saltwater tank is I would buy full saltwater setups. So maybe they had a really nice light, but the tank and rock and whatever wasn't that great. So I'd buy a full used tank setup, keep the lights, and then pretty much break even or make $100 or $200 on the setup. And now I would bring those lights to my new tank. So every piece of equipment was brought together from probably
different objects.
Tanks.
Yeah.
So that was one way for me as a hobbyist to enjoy the hobby.
Kind of part of the fun, right?
And I got to see a lot of different stuff. So maybe this had one fish that I liked or something like that.
Yeah.
Now for the average everyday consumer, they really can't do that per se. What I think is easiest, if you want to keep it on the cheaper side, is actually do some price comparison against some of your not well-known brands. There's some really good equipment out there that not a lot of people have heard of. That is way significantly cheaper.
But it has the same benefits too.
It does the same thing. So whether you think some Chinese products are worse than a product slapped with a label on that's also Chinese as well, or made in Taiwan, not that much different. You just do your research.
Yeah.
I've used a lot of Chinese lights in the past. Actually, a lot of Chinese equipment. To me, I know what works and what doesn't. Just trial and error.
I mean, it's no different than if you went to Walmart, whether you want to get a name brand like Tyson chicken nuggets versus Great Value. It's all going to taste the same at the end of the day, too. So,
as long as it works.
And I mean, that comes with equipment, like you were heavy on equipment there, but that goes with fish, too. I mean, you could get different type of fish, almost, I mean, pretty decent price, too, especially here at Whitlyn Aquatics, but even more so, you hear the term, which we're going to go into, saltwater myth number 2, coral is too difficult. Not only does it come with that hefty price tag that a lot of people say, but it's too difficult to get into. Matt, you service it, but you're also a coral connoisseur. Talk to us.
I personally think it's easy. Why I think it's easy is because you stick with the regimen and you stick to it. A lot of people try to chase things and change their tank because they read something off a form that someone else works. What you have to do is find out what works best for your tank.
Yeah.
So if something is working, why change it? What I like to say is if $500 torch is too expensive, they make frags of that torch, which is a smaller one. Or if an SPS colony is too much, well, I'm sure there's $20 or $30 frags of this coral. It's not going to cost you near as much to grow it out yourself.
Yeah.
And is it hard? That's relative. Is keeping an aquarium in general hard? You're supposed to do water changes, testing.
Just take care of it in general. Yeah.
It's not hard. It's just a routine. You could spend 1 hour a week and you could have a successful reef tank. That's it. It's 1 hour a week.
It's not much to it, too. And I hear it all the time that people think they're like, it's too difficult because you're getting into different trace elements and whether nitrate, phosphate, alk, the whole 9.
Yeah.
But really it comes down to what you just said, too. Online peer pressure, whether you read multiple forums or you hear that, if you say you had a method and I had a method, but I'm kind of new, I want to go to your method. And honestly, that might not work for my style of tank, too. No one's going to have the same style of tank, and I think that is what's crucial in this reefing hobby because, again, you may have a heavy reef tank, I have a heavy fish tank. So different things work for different things.
So one of the biggest things I've ever learned in servicing is every service contract is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot follow the same regimen as tank A through B through C. They're all different. They have to take different requirements. Some like higher nitrates, higher phosphates, lower alk. They are all, it's not a rinse and repeat.
Mm-hmm.
It's what works best for my tank. And you will see it. Your coral responds and tells you it's not looking good. You're trying 30 different things. Did you really try even one thing? Because you have to let that one thing settle out a little bit longer to see if that one thing even works.
And I think that's what people get scared of the most is, and trust me, Matt's been through it. I have been through it. You will make mistakes in this hobby. So don't feel like the coral's too difficult and it dies off. I mean, that's just part of this hobby. But you will figure it out in due time. Just most importantly, keep it simple. Is what I'd like to say.
That's all we like to do is keep it simple.
Saltwater myth number 3 is going to be the more light, the better. And we're talking about price, intensity. But here's what I hear most of all in this statement: duration. Matt, talk to us.
Touches back on every tank is different.
Mm-hmm.
The more light, the better, no. For 90% tanks out there, no.
Say that one more time to the camera.
For 90% of the tanks out there, the more light, the better. That's false.
Yeah.
Every time I see someone come in the store or servicing, the first question they have is, what light do I buy? That is probably the last thing on my list every time I build a tank, because all I'm looking for is a good par level.
Yeah. And par level is going to be the measurement of light. For those of you guys that don't know what that means. And most importantly, when I see this all the time, and we see this on our auction stream, they question all the time, hey, I'm having a lot of algae growth. And then when I ask, how long do you have your lights on? They'll say about 11 to 12 hours. That's at full intensity. And for me, I mean, you might disagree. I think that's a big no-no, and especially if they have a higher white intensity light, that's where you're going to get a lot of the algae growth from.
It's so different for every tank.
Yep.
You see some of the old school reefers, they were 14-10, 14 hours, 10 hours off. But if you start looking at some of the older forms, let's go back in the day, metal halides. Metal halides were really strong. They used them maybe 6 to 8 hours a day. Yeah. That was about it. The rest of it was T5 and some accents. So it might have been 14 hours, but it was really only 6 to 8 hours of strong. So that's where the LEDs come in. The problem is they're so strong you don't even see that they're strong. Yeah, they're on for way too long.
And you'll set with those LEDs too. They'll have a ramp up, a ramp down period. So if you do have an LED light that has maybe app capability, definitely make sure you have a ramp up and ramp down. But sometimes too strong of light, most importantly, is can what kill your coral at the end of the day too.
Yeah, absolutely. Too strong light, it's going to produce some of the bleaching effects and some other different things that you see in coral. That's the biggest, I don't know how it's happened, but that's the biggest gimmick in this whole saltwater hobby.
Yeah.
What light brand I'm going to choose. You've got, I don't know who came up with this marketing strategy, but they did an amazing job. Yeah. Because that's all people cared about.
Because you only hear those two names.
Hey, typically. Lights. Well, there's thousands of them out there, but you only know 3 brands.
You may know 3 brands, but you talk about thousands. Sometimes those cost thousands of dollars just for that light. And that honestly can be enough to be like, no, that's too much in the budget for me, which I completely understand with today's times. But we go back to kind of what we said in myth number 1. It's all about getting in your budget by finding those that have great reviews. You kind of watch videos of them. Go to YouTube. Go watch different videos of them as well. And when you see that growth and you have those maybe great value brands, they're going to still do the exact same thing as those $1,000 lights.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, saltwater myth number 4, and this one has actually got me, but you were the one that talked me out of it. Start nano before you start big. Why is that a big myth in this hobby?
Everyone wants to have a trial run of what they do. And I understand it 100%. A nano, you might have a tenth of the money.
Yeah.
Or a fourth of the money, depending on how extreme you want to go with it. But I promise you, if you've liked this hobby for a while or you've been on the edge, start with the tank that you're going to want in the future.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you buy something once, and that's where it gets it's too expensive. Because hey, I've already bought all this equipment. Does it transfer over? No, you're going from a 10-gallon to 120 gallons.
Yeah.
That light, that heater, all that stuff is now
it's irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. And you try to sell it, it's not going to get anything. So now we've just purchased a piece of equipment twice.
And that's a big thing too. So actually, with my story, I started with a 75-gallon, went up all the way to 150. So I literally doubled in size. But I was originally, when I first became a customer here, I wanted to start with a 20, 30-gallon. But you're like, no, go with the one that you wanted, because at the end of the day, number one, they'll thank you later, and I am. But number two, it really comes down to when you see these things, whether it's aquascapes, whether it's different tanks, which is a popular fish in this hobby, you cannot get by with a 30-gallon cube or less. So then what's going to happen is, you said all that equipment is null and void. And most importantly, if you try and get away with putting a tang and angelfish and something smaller, all you're going to do is completely disrupt that whole ecosystem. So,
absolutely. I see it way too often.
Yeah.
Everyone starts with a very small tank. And don't get me wrong, they're beautiful. But it is what it is. You're not going to want the typical dory and all these other fish. You just can't put them in there.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, start with the tank.
So, I mean, if you got to save up and get the bigger tank, get the bigger tank, especially if you're in the saltwater hobby. Now, there's some experts that do love like an all reef nano cube. That's one thing. But people, if you're just kind of a common Joe or Jane in this hobby, they're definitely going to want to go with heavy on fish and then kind of lean them more into that coral side of things. So I'll go with the tank that you want. And saltwater myth number 5 for this series. Now you've already established in the tank, you're kind of seeing these fish. Now you're starting to learn about the different diseases that come in the fish hobby. This one is actually my favorite.
I'm already laughing.
It is great. It literally is great. Myth number 5, you need a fish doctor to cure any and all diseases and or parasites in the tank. Matt, yes, this is hilarious, but this is actually what people hear. Please explain to us.
So here's my analogy of what happened. Cleaner asses sales were low. This is what it is. I think cleaner asses sales are low. They're like, we're going to pump out cleaner asses today. No, in actuality, it can help the fish, yes. But if you have parasites, they're never going to go away unless you take the proper precautions to get them. The whole myth about do they clean, and yeah, that is part of their food and diet, but it does not actually help the fish near as much as people think it does. And honestly, they usually end up passing away before you can actually treat them because they thought the cleaner wrasse or the cleaner shrimp or anything like that will cure them.
And usually people don't, especially with blue streak cleaner wrasses. I mean, we have an entire legend of what's easy, medium, and difficult here at Whitlyn Aquatics. But those aren't easy fish to take care of, too, those blue streak. Because not only do they have a crazy, an insane appetite, but sometimes they'll just throw it in, hope for the best. And sometimes those fish won't take too kindly to having a new fish into that established setup. So, number one, that's a gamble in its own right. But number two, if you think that the blue streak cleaner wrasse or any cleaner wrasse is going to look for a snack like we do with chips or cookies, and they look for ick, it's not going to happen. They can fight off a little bit of, kind of help clean the fish, but they are not preventing ick in that aquarium.
It would be like if someone is very sick and you gave them an ibuprofen. Does it help you make them feel a little bit better? Does it cure the sickness? No, you're still going to be absolutely ill at the end of the day. So it's not even close to the same effect of what you would normally do.
So in those, really precautionary stages, I would advise to, also going back to it, get you a doctor tank is what we like to call it, or a quarantine tank. Get the proper medication needed, and we have a full list of Whitlyn Aquatics that we can help you out with that. But, to prevent having ick, to get that into your display tank, because those like easy curable treatments in just the day, throw it in your display and it's good to go, fish included, it's all BS. It's not a real thing. It's just a marketing scheme at the end of the day.
Cleaner wrasse marketing scheme. That's what it is.
You heard it first from Whitlyn Aquatics.